minutes, maybe 30 minutes here, and then we'll answer some questions from the clip and from our last article for tonight. So, been talking about deviance, crime. Most cases, we're going to agree on what is a crime and what is not a crime, for the most part, you know, when it comes to the serious offenses, the most serious offense. And especially for, you know, when people do horrible things and are violent, you know, most of us are going to agree that's just, you know, something has to be done soon, fast, and right away. And severe is probably better than light, you know, where there's violence and property damage and things like that. So of course, all the serious crimes, you know, those are horrible and outrageous and so on and so forth. When it comes to the grayer areas, though, there's another way to think about, you know, our criminal justice system. One approach here that is popular in social problems is the so-called social constructionist approach to problems and approach to deviance. As a way of looking at social problems and deviance, this approach is going to, again, it's going to get away from absolutes, and it's going to assume that all of our problems here, and especially, again, how societies deal with their problems and how they deal with their deviance, are constructions of some kind. And it's kind of stating the obvious again. What does it mean? What is a social construction? What does that, you know, refer to? Well, let's take one example. Cocaine. Should it be illegal? We'll just do a hand. Maybe, well, you don't have to raise your hands, but you can mentally raise your hand. Should cocaine be illegal? Yes or no? All of us are going to probably say yes, right? Probably. Does anyone know who Sigmund Freud is, for example? Sigmund Freud was a heavy cocaine user at a time when cocaine was not as, it wasn't as, you know, punished as severely as it is now. So we all agree it should be illegal. How much, well, you can't have any, right? But if you were to have a little bit, how much would put you in jail? You know, how much could you sell? You know, who decided all that stuff? Who decided, first of all, cocaine should be illegal? And that you should go to jail for it? Someone decided, right? At some point. It was not always illegal. Morphine, for example, you could get over the counter. Heroin, you know, some of these products were created by pharmaceutical companies back in the day. Aspirin and so on they were making too, but also, you know, other drugs that would become abused drugs like morphine and derivative heroin. Anyway, so somebody decided that. So that's a construction. Somebody decided this is the law, this is the number of years this offense gets, right? Or we can do this with any sort of offense, not just drugs, of course. But okay, so some of these problems are very real, right? Deviance and violence, we can all agree on that stuff. But some of our other problems don't have or as solid a basis in fact. And here we get into the gray area. You know, it's nice to think in black and white. It's easier to think in black and white. But you know, the gray area is the hard area to think about, because how long should someone go to jail for selling, you know, a pound of cocaine? You know, should they be in jail for the rest of their life? Is that fair? Or, you know, I don't know. You know, Singapore, in some cases, up to anonymity, you're going to be executed. You know, there's the death penalty. Anyway, so tough questions for societies. This approach to problems, though, here, that's just the authors who I'm looking at here, is going to ask certain kinds of questions. Our last article is going to fit well here when it comes to wrongful convictions in a second, but this approach to problems and this way of seeing problems is going to be based on a set of questions here, starting with claims makers. Again, who is making the claim, you know, about whatever the problem is, or the form of deviance is. So that's one. Who are the claims makers? Of course, claims makers can be right, they can be absolutely right, and they can be correct in the way they see things, you know, of course. But two, what is being claimed, and why are the claims being made? Three, how are the claims being promoted? It's also important. 4, whose interests will be served? if the claims are accepted within society, accepted as true. And then lastly, what will be the consequences or the impact if the claims are accepted as true and then acted upon within society. I think I'll let our video use some examples here instead of running off some examples here. Our last, well, both of our videos will deal with some of these things here too. Our next case study here will deal with some of these issues too. So we'll leave these as open questions. Okay, so from the constructionist view, then, just there, give it weight here. Some things will be seen as problems more so than others. And so we can think about that here. Okay, so good here. Almost in there. Consequences. Lastly, we'll see some consequences in the videos here. Some pretty severe ones for the unlucky individuals featured in the videos. Okay, so again, just a real quick slide here. Some crimes we see, they're all open and obvious. Which ones we see every day on the news? Almost every day. I almost, I gotta watch the local news just to keep up with things, know what's going on in the community, but it gets depressing fast. Every night, there's what? Well, there's a jail, or there's, the bank robbery, or, murders, and violence, theft, and another person gone missing, and so on. There are other crimes that we do not see as well, and they are harder to see. One example of harder crimes to see are white-collar crimes. And so we just want to spend a real brief couple of minutes here on white-collar crime. I wish we could spend a whole class on this, and maybe we could include more material. I spent a couple classes, 2 classes, maybe it was more 3, spending semesters talking about white-collar crime. And so there's an expert at Western Michigan who I took classes with, Ronald Creamer, who had written books and articles and so on white-collar crime. So what is it? All we need to know is just what it is, and then just some of the features here. What is white-collar crime? Most of us already know, generally what it is. But as defined by Edwin Sutherland, who was one of the first criminologists to focus on white-collar crime, he defined it as crimes committed by people of respectable social positions, typically of high status, typically within their occupations, and typically by people who already have wealth and in some cases power. So white-collar crime sometimes is broken down into occupational crime, which is one set of crimes. These are crimes committed within a work setting. Typically, these are crimes committed without the organization knowing that someone within the organization is doing something criminal. Usually the organization doesn't know what's going on there. And so there's a whole list of examples here we could think of. I sometimes read off examples I can remember of things that people have done, and people have told me personal examples of minor, well, pretty minor organizational crimes. I knew one person who knew someone who worked at one of the malls around the area, and they were embezzling. What would they do? I think they would order more product than they needed, and then they would keep the product and then sell it. I knew someone else who talked about someone who, as a server, they would trump the bill on the, or they would just make the bill smaller after they would serve the table, and they'd get the big tip, right? But then if someone had chips and fries, they wouldn't put the fries on the bill, and they would pocket the money from the fries. That's a classic embezzlement, or not full embezzlement, but getting money that's not yours. So within the work setting, typically without the employer knowing. Okay, occupation. There's a whole more list of other more serious ones. Organizational crime. These are much more not going to say widespread, but more systematic. They're in many cases, examples we're going to see here, built into the institutions in some cases, and sometimes built into the organization. So, organizational crime carried out by an organization. This is going to include a whole set of crimes here that include corporate crimes within corporations and carried out by corporations, and government crimes. So back to the social construction view, can a government, the government makes the laws, right, or the people within the government, or the system, right? But can governments do criminal things? The question is, yes, they can, and they have done criminal things. I'm not just thinking about the U.S., but around the world, governments certainly do criminal things, some very horrible criminal things. So anyway, do those theories we looked at, differential association, deviant subculture, labeling, strain theory, do they apply to this set of crimes? We can leave that as open question right now, unless you've got some thoughts you want to interject. Okay, so white-collar crime. Edwin Sutherland argued that these are crimes that most people don't see, and we know this still today. Up until 2001 or so, or when was it, 2002, when Enron was convicted of mass systemic fraud, wrongdoers were typically barely given a slap on the wrist in many cases. And the argument goes that, well, they were doing financial crime, no big deal, nobody really gets hurt. You're making a little money on the side, who cares? No big problem. Anyway, Sutherland argued that most theories of crime look down at the lower classes. And so street crime, yeah, we see it. Yeah, it's probably most cases worse. Someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to be have their property stolen. Yeah, street crime is terrible. It's horrible. That's not the issue. But Sutherland said, most of us, we want the news and we see the news. Lower classes, all these horrible things people do. But there's a whole other set of crimes we don't see. Surprisingly, when you add up the numbers, and this I couldn't believe either when I was taking these classes early on, was you add up the money and you add up, start to add up the cost to human lives, if we're going to include some of these things as criminal, which is a gray area too. White-collar crimes can cost more money and more lives than street crime, all the street crimes put together. And we'll look at some of those numbers here and how so. So it just doesn't seem right. How could that possibly be, especially in terms of lives? Okay, so some examples. This is a long quote. You can get the idea, the main idea down there. But Coleman and Curbo, this is a couple years ago, another text, talk about the yearly death toll from unsafe products. When you look into these numbers, again, if it's criminal, if we're going to agree that unsafe products, let's take one example of an unsafe product. Remember the what was it called, fen diet or something? You mix one drug with another one, and drug companies were pushing this as a way to lose weight. Well, it was toxic, and some people died from it. It wasn't just some, it was a bunch of people died. Is that criminal in the same way, right? So anyway, there's a gray area there. We'll grant. Anyway, unsafe products, worker safety violations, not always criminal in the same way, but just look into these numbers once. Illegal toxic dumping, look into those numbers once. You add up those deaths, and it's going to be way higher than murder. For example, Chicago, how many people were killed last year? I think it was like 520-some in Chicago, one of the worst, most violent cities last year. Look at the numbers for asbestos, just like the last couple months. Just Wikipedia that, and those deaths are going to be way higher. We're talking about in the thousands. Over years, we're talking about many more than that. So anyway, if that's criminal behavior, big if, then we're talking about in many cases more lives. When it comes to money, take the average bank robber, and what do they get? Good bank robbery. How much you making? You're making maybe, if you're lucky, hundreds of thousands, millions, maybe. You'd have to be a pretty good bank robbery, $1 million. But when we talk about financial fraud, we'll see in a second, we're talking about billions. And Enron's defrauding of customers, well into the millions. Okay, so some well-known cases here. I'm going to list a bunch here. Let's focus on one of these to know for the test, but I'm just going to list some of these. Here, we're good with this main idea. More money, more lives. That's an argument. Again, if you want to say, well, it's a different kind of criminality, people aren't trying to hurt people, maybe they didn't mean to do it, then maybe it's a different kind of culpability, different kind of responsibility. Anyway, Bhopal, India. Let's take one example. What happened in Bhopal, India? There was a toxic release, and 500,000 people were exposed to toxic material. Right away, about 4,000 people were dead. Again, 4,000. That's how many more than the city of Chicago, boom, right then dead. When you look at the estimates of people over a number of years, we're talking more like 15,000 people were affected. Potentially life-threatening illnesses from this toxic release. Okay, so people would say, well, that's just an accident. Nobody meant to release that chemical, which is true. No one would want that to happen. Why is this criminal? Why was the case considered criminal? Well, Union Carbide did not notify the people there. They tried to hide it. To this day, they haven't taken responsibility for it. And every attempt to try to bring lawsuits against them, again, Wikipedia, look into it, they fought it ever since. But the 4,000 people died instantly. There's no question they died from the chemical. So they tried to hide it, and they tried to cover it up. Ford Pinto controversy, that's an interesting one. You can get.
Is the top one the one we need to know?
Let's know what went on in Enron. Let's pick that one.
Enron?
Yeah, let's do Enron. So you can look into that one on your own time and dig into that and why it was criminal or just basically what happened. So so we'll pick Enron. Jack Abramoff, Bernie Madoff. Again, we're talking about billions of dollars here, millions here with Abramoff. He was a lobbyist who was very influential. There's a really good movie called Casino Jack. How about this? Extra credit option. If you watch the documentary version, you can write a 2-page write-up. I'll put it on Blackboard. Make it easy for you. So there's an extra credit option. I'll post that. Okay, so those are some well-known cases. Some are controversial, and so on. Okay, so that brings us now to a different topic, but still under this umbrella of the constructionist approach, or way of looking at crimes. Which crimes we see, which ones we don't see. Now we come to the criminals we do see. The obvious suspects. I want to look at this short clip here, and then I'll look at a longer video, both on the same topic of wrongful convictions. Alright, so I'll let the video introduce who they were and all that stuff, because it does a good job.
A long time on death row, a long time in and out of solitary, a long time for something that you insist you didn't do. Today, 3 men who were supposed to never walk free did just that. They were called the West Memphis Three, convicted of murdering 3 Cub Scouts in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1993, despite any physical evidence linking them to the crime. After years of fighting for freedom, they were released today in a very unusual plea deal. Aaron Moriarty of 48 Hours Mystery has been on this story for 4 years.
My name is Damian Eccles. I'm 36 years old and released today from death row for a crime I did not commit.
Arkansas death row inmate Damian Eccles got his life back today. As part of an unusual plea agreement, Eccles and 2 other convicted men, Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly, were released from prison.
This has been going on for over 18 years, and it's been an absolute living hell.
17 years ago, Damian Eccles was sentenced to death. The other 2 were given life. Jason Baldwin.
In the beginning, we told them that we were innocent, and they sent us to prison for the rest of our lives for it.
3 teenagers were taken into custody.
Known as the West Memphis Three, the men were teenagers in 1994 when they were convicted of killing 3 8-year-old boys in the town of West Memphis, Arkansas. Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore. Investigators in this rural community believe that the teenagers killed the children as part of a satanic ritual. In recent years, though, DNA evidence has been recovered at the scene, none of it linking the accused to the crime. Their freedom comes at a high price. Under the unusual agreement known as an Alford plea, the 3 men who still say they are innocent had to plead guilty to murder.
And the only thing that the state would do for us was to say, hey, we'll let you go. only if you yield. And that's not justice no matter how you look at it.
While the father of one of the victims voiced his support for the three men,
I'm glad that they're free.
Sir, would you have a seat, please?
another had to be removed from the court after objecting to the deal.
This was not justice.
A deal that almost didn't happen. Jason Baldwin, who didn't initially want to make the plea, finally agreed to get Damien Echols off death row.
I did not want to take the deal from the get-go. However, they're trying to kill Damien.
It's a really sad story and a surprising development, Scott.
Aaron, I wonder, why did the prosecutors go for this deal?
Well, the official state's position is that these men are guilty, but the prosecuting attorney today admitted that eventually these three men would have gotten new trials and they were likely to be acquitted during those trials. So this, in some ways, was a face-saving move for the state.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, so next one.
We are up there now with sex, motherhood, apple pie, and baseball.
Forensic science is everywhere.
It's a match.
On TV,
It's a match. It's a match.
it is used to arrest
Now I'm scared. They had me handcuffed.
and to convict.
They charged me with capital murder.
But what we thought was science may not be,
We're using techniques that have never been validated scientifically.
like the science of fingerprints.
No two people have the same fingerprint. That's the scientific premise. Is that true?
I thought so.
Casey Anthony.
In fact, there is no national standard for any forensic testimony.
The judge allowed in the smell test when it comes to death.
And it had never been allowed in a court.
And what about getting certified in forensics? You can do that online.
If you want a certificate that says you are certified in forensics, this is the place to go to.
Tonight on Frontline, correspondent Lowell Bergman joins with ProPublica in an investigation of one of the increasingly controversial tools of the criminal justice system, forensic science.
There's something that people need to understand about bad expert witness testimony and bad science. It doesn't just put innocent people in jail. It leaves murderers on the street.
CSI is the most watched drama series in the world, brimming with flash and glamour, where cutting-edge forensic technology always reveals the truth. But crime scene investigations in the real world are rarely so simple.
Henry 51, can you advise the tow yard that's housing the 187 vehicle from the night? Case number 20075. Negative, I need to know so I can be out.
Detective Joanna Gravetti leads the crime scene investigation unit for the police department in Richmond, California, one of the most dangerous cities in America.
Everyone thinks that when you tell them that you're a CSI that you're like what they see on TV. The real CSI is dealing with blood, getting dirty underneath a car, smelling things that you don't want to smell, saying things that you don't want to see. You see the worst that humans are capable of doing to one another. There is evidence that needs to be collected, documented, processed. It's about taking the time to find the small things that are going to wind up being a big thing down the road.
Things like fingerprints, one of the most widely used of all forensic techniques. For over a century, fingerprints have been used to identify criminals, from petty thieves to international terrorists. In 2004, a series of explosions in the subways of Madrid killed or injured nearly 2,000 people. When the dust settled, the Spanish authorities found several partial fingerprints on a bag of detonators.
Now, at the time, the Spanish National Police did not identify anybody to those prints, so they sent the prints to Interpol, who then forwarded them to the FBI.
Melissa Gish is a fingerprint expert at the legendary FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
The examiner analyzed the prints.
He ran them through the system.
And in this case, the examiner found a match.
Yes, in this case, the examiner effected an identification.
The FBI's identification led them to a suburb of Portland, Oregon, where a young attorney was working in his office.
I got an unexpected knock on the door. I cracked the door open, and there was two individuals, a man and a woman, and they identified themselves quickly that they were FBI agents.
The FBI examiner determined that this fingerprint found in Madrid matched a print taken from Brandon Mayfield when he was in the military.
They proceeded to push through rather forcefully, to handcuff me. It was just unbelievable. It was surreal. I mean, one minute you're sitting there and you've taken your kids to school and you've said, have a good day and be a learning superstar, and you're working on your case in your office, and the next minute you're heading downtown in cuffs, and people are searching you for blasting caps and detonators.
For generations, the FBI and their fingerprint examiners have maintained that fingerprint identification is infallible, routinely testifying that they are 100% certain, and there's 0% chance they could be wrong.
Fingerprint examiners have been taught that there's only one person in the world who could have left this fingerprint. There's no scientific basis for that.
Wait a second. There's no scientific basis for matching like a partial fingerprint?
The premise is that no two people have the same fingerprint. That's the scientific premise. Is that true?
I thought so.
Has there ever been a scientific study to demonstrate that that is true? I don't think so. But even more important, how much alike do they have to be before you say that that fingerprint came from this person? What is the standard for how many points of comparison?
What's the standard, Judge?
It varies from laboratory to laboratory and from witness to witness often. And some will say, we need 16 points. No, 7. And what they all end up saying is that it's really a matter of the individual experience and judgment of the fingerprint examiner.
To make an identification, the fingerprint collected at the crime scene is examined for unique characteristics, like ridges, loops, and whorls. Those points are then compared with a known print. Once the examiner believes there are enough points of similarity, he declares it a match.
Welcome to forensic identification. Paper is a very good object to get prints from. Letters, bags.
Ken Moses is a veteran fingerprint examiner who has investigated more than 17,000 crime scenes in his 40-year career.
I can see a lot of detail on those prints.
When you're looking at this partial print versus the known print, when do you decide that it's a match? How do you decide it's a match?
At some point, you are examining this evidence, and based on your training and experience, you make a leap of faith.
You make a leap of faith?
It's a point of decision-making. It's where you go from doubt to no doubt. That's a leap of faith.
After Mayfield was identified, the FBI learned he was a Muslim active in his community, which he maintains led to his arrest. Mayfield insisted he was not a terrorist and had never been to Spain. The only evidence against him was that partial fingerprint. But at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, the print was matched by a second examiner and then confirmed by the head of the FBI's fingerprint unit. So 3 examiners would say that this was Brandon Mayfield's fingerprint.
In this case, they did, yes.
And I believe they provided an affidavit saying it was 100%.
That is how they did testify in that manner, yes.
A Portland, Oregon man has been arrested by FBI.
Officials are detaining Mayfield in the county jail.
His fingerprint was found on a plastic bag with bomb-related material.
He could be held indefinitely.
It was a nightmare. You know, when you're there in your jail cell alone and you're just faced with your own thought. That's when the gravity of the situation really sunk in.
Okay, so you're in the lockup, they say that you're 100% matched. Your lawyers get a fingerprint examiner, right?
Yes. The one hope was that this fingerprint examiner would straighten it all out and wouldn't agree with these other 3 examiners who said that this is a 100% conclusive match.
I received a call from Portland, a request which I get many times a week to take a look at a print.
Ken Moses was selected as the independent expert in the Mayfield case.
I didn't know what finger they'd identified, so I had 10 possibilities. So I started with the thumb, went to the index, went to the middle, no, boom, I come up with one, here's one with a couple of similarities, couple more. By the time I got to 15, I said, this looks like an identification.
So then you got on the phone with the court.
That's right.
And you testified. And what did you tell them on the phone?
I say I have examined the known print and I've concluded that the fingerprint is a positive match. That's what I told them.
And he actually confirmed what the other 3 examiners had said. And from that point on, I kind of felt like the train to a death penalty had just pulled out of the station.
Mayfield says his own lawyers assumed that the print was his. 2 weeks into his detention, he had to decide whether he would testify or exercise his right to remain silent.
I was going to go to the hearing and tell the judge what it was I was going to do. I was either going to testify or not talk. And you have to excuse me because it was difficult. I waited and I waited, and my attorney showed up and he said, Brandon, he said, we just learned it ourselves that the Spanish police had identified this late fingerprint as belonging to an Algerian. And I looked at him and I said, you know, like, see, I told you. I told you it wasn't me.
When you heard that it wasn't him, what'd you think?
Well, I knew that our profession had taken some sort of a quantum leap because suddenly there were new rules involved. No time before in history had there ever been 2 fingerprints with 15 minutiae that were not the same person. Under our past standards, I was right, but I was wrong. I had made an error. And so had every other examiner that looked at the print. So therefore, when I heard there was an error, I knew the ground had shifted somewhere, and indeed it had.
We've been using this for 100 years. We ought to have some serious amounts of science to support the claims that examiners make.
So it hasn't gone through.
Jennifer Mnookin, a law professor at UCLA, is heading a study funded by the Justice Department on fingerprint identification.
What matters here isn't, are your fingerprints really different from that guy over there? The real question is some part of your fingerprint sufficiently similar to some part of his that a competent examiner might mistake some part of your print for a part of somebody else's print? Well, that's exactly what happened with Brandon Mayfield.
There had been other mistakes in the past, but the Mayfield case highlighted the weak link in fingerprint identification, the examiner.
Running both prints through AFIS.
Unlike fingerprint analysis on television, machines do not make a match. People do.
The examiner is the instrument of analysis. There is no objective criteria. It's a subjective judgment of the fingerprint examiner.
Dr. Etiel Dror, a cognitive neuroscientist based in London, is one of the world's leading authorities on fingerprint analysis. He says that examiners can be influenced by bias.
We're talking about bias that's unconscious.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about a conscious conspiracy to
match up the suspect with the fingerprint.
Absolutely. We're talking about dedicated, hardworking, honest, competent forensic examiners.
Dr. Dror says this is cognitive bias, and in a study to show how strong that bias can be, he took real cases where examiners had found a match, changed the descriptions of the crime, and then asked the same examiners to analyze them again.
I gave the same prints to the same examiner without their knowledge, and a large majority of the examiners said now it's not a match.
So in over half the cases, they would disagree with their former opinion?
Yes, it changed their perception and judgment, and over half said it is not a match.
In the study that Dr. Dror did, the examiners changed their mind. Over half of them.
4 out of 5.
Same data, same examiner?
Mm-hmm.
Same examiner.
Right.
Completely different result. How can that be a science?
Well, there's going to be, I think, variability anytime there's a human involved in the process.
So it sounds like you agree with Dr. Dror when he's talking about cognitive bias.
If you're asking me if I think that there is the potential for cognitive bias to come into play in a fingerprint examination process, I would say yes.
After nearly a century of insisting in and out of court that fingerprint analysis is infallible, the FBI has now changed the way it testifies. Today, particularly since the Mayfield case, you don't testify the way you used to testify, right?
Right. I certainly wouldn't say 100% certain or 0 error rate. I would want to explain any of those things if I was asked about them.
So there is no infallibility here.
I would not testify to that, no.
I think fingerprint evidence is accepted in the United States. I think it is a rare case when they get it wrong. And, you know, the critics can scream all they want, but it's a very vital part of our criminal justice system.
He didn't go to jail or anything though, right?
Scott Burns is the director of the National District Attorneys Association, which represents state and local prosecutors who handle the vast majority of criminal cases.
Nobody ever asked me about the hundreds of thousands of cases every year where it does work and where good forensic scientists testify. We get it right most of the time. The Mayfield case is the anomaly. It is the rare exception. And to hold that up as somehow representative of what goes on in courtrooms across America is just wrong.
What is an anomaly is that they found out, not that they made a mistake. How can he say that you get it right most of the time? How did he know that it's not the tip of the iceberg? To say that Mayfield is an anomaly in a single case is naive at best.
The courts have been misled for a long time because we had been told, my colleagues and I, by some experts from the FBI, that fingerprint comparisons involved essentially a 0 error rate. Without our ever understanding, that's completely inaccurate.
Harry T. Edwards is a federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. He's an authority on the forensic sciences. We caught up with him in New York, where he agreed to an exclusive interview. The National District Attorneys Association and some of the more prominent fingerprint examiners that we've talked to, they're saying things were fine, are fine, and fingerprints have worked fine in court for decades, if not a century.
If some people are saying it works because we've gotten convictions, that is to say nothing more than juries and judges have believed that experts knew what they were talking about, and so they bought it and they convicted. That's not proof that the discipline is undergirded by serious science.
Well, they say that it's based on practice. It's based on years of experience. It's based on, that's valid, isn't it, Your Honor?
No, of course not. If your experience or practice it has been inaccurate or wrong for many years, it doesn't become better because it's many years. It's just many years of doing it incorrectly. And the stakes are too high. We're talking about prosecution, incarceration. The stakes are too high.
Can you advise the 1020 on the 187?
In Richmond, California, Detective Gravetti is called to a homicide, the 3rd shooting of the day.
The coroner just arrived.
wakes me up in the middle of the night is the wail of a mother when they find out that their child's been killed. And it's that sound, not only does it keep me up at night, it's what drives me to make sure that I don't hear it again. I want to find justice for these people. They deserve justice. Their family deserves justice.
There's a bullet in the tire somewhere.
Yeah, I got it.
Got it?
Oh yeah, beautiful.
Oh, look at that. Oh, wow. Obviously a hollow point bullet, and what's important is the characteristics that are left on it. It's copper jacketing, it has the markings. Hopefully we can find something that will help us link that bullet to that gun.
Evidence is extremely important in any investigation. It's going to help figure out what happened, how it happened, possibly why it happened, and it puts people in jail. It gets people out of jail.
Gravetti and thousands of forensic investigators around the country collect the evidence that is relied on to catch criminals. But questions are being raised about the scientific validity of some of the techniques they use. In an unprecedented report, the National Academy of Sciences concluded that many forensic sciences have never been exposed to stringent scientific scrutiny and do not meet the fundamental requirements of science. In addition to fingerprints, this includes analyzing blood spatter, matching hair and fibers, or ballistic analysis, the matching of marks on a bullet casing to a gun.
I think I and probably many of my colleagues assumed that the forensic disciplines were based on a solid scientific methodology and were valid and reliable.
Judge Edwards was a primary author of the National Academy of Sciences report.
When you saw forensic science, did you have any reason to question it?
No. You assume that the work in putting the evidence together and in offering the testimony was proper. There could be mistakes, and you understood there could be challenges, but you didn't assume what we later uncovered, which were there were systemic, serious problems with respect to certain of the disciplines.
One of the disciplines the report found to be among the most controversial was bite mark analysis, which produced a high percentage of false positives. In the small town of Brooksville, Mississippi, a series of brutal murders tested the limits of this controversial forensic technique. LaVon Brooks remembers a day in September 1990 like it was yesterday.
My brother came and told me, said, police looking for you. And I said, for what? And he said, I don't know. They didn't tell me that. And I said, I'm going to go down to the county jail and see what they want with me.
A 3-year-old girl had been abducted, sexually assaulted, murdered, and dumped in a pond. Brooks was the ex-boyfriend of the girl's mother, and the police wanted to talk to him.
They kept me like for 72 hours for questioning and investigation. So I ain't got no problem with that. So then they said they want to do a dental impression on me. And I said, okay, fine.
Body and the photographs that
A
you've seen.
pathologist, Dr. Stephen Hain, conducted the girl's autopsy. He suspected there were bite marks on her wrist. And he recommended that this man, Michael West, a forensic dentist, examine her.
They ran a dental impression of me. And then like a week later, my lawyer came to me and told me, said, we got a little bad news. I said, what you mean? He said, the bite marks on the little girl match yours. I said, man, how can I bite somebody and I wasn't even there? He said, well, this is what they came up with.
Brooks said he was working at a bar filled with customers when the crime occurred. But during the trial, the bite marks, the only physical evidence linking Brooks to the crime, trumped the defense's eyewitness testimony.
They charged me with capital murder. I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't even believe it.
LaVon Brooks was sentenced to life in prison.
I felt like my life was over with. My mother told me, she said, I know you didn't do that, but I want you to hold your head up and God gonna bring you out. And I know God knows, and my family knows that I hadn't did that.
While Brooks was serving his time, another 3-year-old girl was abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Her body was found in a nearby stream. Her autopsy was also performed by Dr. Stephen Hain, who was called to testify about his findings. With an eerie similarity to the earlier case, Dr. Hain testified that he saw what he believed to be bite marks on the girl's body. And the forensic dentist, Michael West, testified that those bite marks came from this man, Kennedy Brewer, the boyfriend of the girl's mother. Brewer was convicted and sent to the Mississippi State Penitentiary to be executed.
There have been a number of people who were convicted based on bite mark testimony, who were sent to death row or to sent to prison for life, and in each of those cases, a whole group of forensic odontologists, forensic dentists, said they were absolutely certain that this was the guy, and they were absolutely wrong.
Peter Neufeld, who represented both Brooks and Brewer, is a founder of the Innocence Project, which has helped free hundreds of people who were wrongfully convicted. Neufeld says that most of those convictions involve the use of what he calls invalid science.
Invalid science meaning it has no basis in fact?
Yeah, like the person who looks at scratch marks on someone's hand and says, those are human bite marks that came from that man to the exclusion of everybody else on the planet. There is no science to support that conclusion, period.
But it was
It's something made up.
But the judge allowed that.
Judge allowed it again and again and again. Frankly, not just one judge, but judges all over the country allowed that testimony because it came in from guys in white lab coats.
There is one forensic science that everyone agrees is valid, DNA. Unlike many of the forensic sciences which were developed by law enforcement, DNA analysis was developed by medical science and has been subjected to decades of rigorous scrutiny.
DNA is the principal example of real science at work. DNA really is the only discipline among the forensic disciplines that consistently produces results that you can rely on with a fair level of confidence.
We looked at all the cases of people who have been exonerated by DNA evidence. We found that in 60% of those cases, experts who testified for the prosecution produced either invalid evidence or the misapplication of science in their testimony.
In other words, DNA has called into question the basic reliability of many of the other forensic sciences.
What we're talking about with forensic science is systemic failure. We're talking about using techniques, using equipment that's never been validated scientifically.
But police and prosecutors say they need to use every tool they can get. And sometimes that means pushing the boundaries of forensic science, even in the most high-profile cases.
911, what's your emergency? I found out my granddaughter has been missing